All right, so let me bring on our guest. Dun, dun, dun. All right, why don't you introduce yourself? And meanwhile, people ask questions on Slack. The channel name is on screen. We can't hear you.
Hi.
Okay.
I thought you were able to unmute me, but I guess not. Hi, everyone. So my name is Leland Richardson. I'm a software engineer at Google. I work specifically on the Compose team and have been working on Compose basically since it started. And yeah, I'm here to answer any questions that anyone has. Could be about Jetpack Compose or anything else.
Ooh, all right. So it's really AMA. So we can ask you anything.
Yeah, sure.
Excellent. So I finally got a chance to try Jetpack Compose. I think part of the reason is because when it first launched, like when the announcement was made at I/O, it sounds really complicated. You have to jump through lots of hoops and like download AOSP or like some ridiculous amount of setup. So for the longest time, I was like, later. But I was pleasantly surprised yesterday when I actually went to the collab and they just like download the latest Android Studio Canary and go through the menus. You don't even have to download some extra zip file or Java or what have you. So that was great. And I kind of, okay, I guess I'll start with the big question that no one's mentioning yet, because basically I keep doing it and I keep thinking that this is kind of like Flutter, but not really. And what strikes me is like the difference in the experience in using it with the IDE, because I felt like the Flutter integration has a lot more in terms of being able to wrap a widget in another one. That's what they call it. They call it widgets, not composables functions. I'm not quite sure where we are on Jetpack Compose in terms of productivity tools like that, because I felt it's very difficult to have all the curly braces aligned when I want to wrap something in another thing. I totally made that mistake when I was doing the collab and I wrapped the wrong thing. And fortunately, the preview was really fast, and I was like, this is not what I wanted. So maybe you can kind of speak to at least your vision of how you think it should work.
Yeah, well, so definitely the developer tools are still kind of a work in progress, and Flutter has, had a long head start in terms of building up those tools and helping developers be productive inside the IDE. There's definitely a lot of ideas floating around internally and how we can improve the tooling, and a lot of that's being worked on right now. It was definitely sort of a second priority for a while. At the moment, we really need to make sure that the foundation of Compose and the actual toolkit itself is solid, because those are things that once we enter into like a beta or 1.0 stage, it becomes incredibly painful to change. And so we're really trying our best to iterate as quickly as possible in these early stages, so that when we do enter that sort of realm, that things are actually quite nice. But that being said, there is a lot of work going on right now with tooling, and like Preview, for instance, was built entirely for Compose, and those things will continue to be improved, and specifically the wrap with a widget type action is something that I think someone brought up and is working on the sort of analogous action in IntelliJ for Compose right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, actually, it speaks to how mature the SDK itself is, because that was the thing that I noticed, is that how do I make it even smoother? Not that it doesn't work or I don't know what I'm doing. Well, I mean, I still don't know what I'm doing, but at least the collab was fairly straightforward to follow. And of course, like Sean and Tim give a really great talk, and we have all these other people in the conference helping us as well. So I have questions that is just not just my own questions, so let me go ahead and read them out loud for you. All right, Thomas asks, once it launches, can we build full-on Android apps just with Compose and none of the other stuff?
So that's definitely the intention. We make sure that interop with the classic view system is very strong, but that's there to make the migration story really, really good. And building an entire app out of Compose is the goal. That said, you're still probably for a while now going to find places where Compose hasn't built sort of an equivalent or something like that. So the existing UI toolkit has been being iterated on for over 10 years, and there are some areas where we've chosen strategically to not play catch up in. A common example is, for instance, like WebView and MapView. Right now, you will still be using the view variants of those just because implementing those is such a massive undertaking. There's also going to be other areas where it won't be as plug and play. And while doing something is very much possible, you might be having to invent some of your own architecture in order to do it. And one of the things that we've really tried to emphasize with Compose is really building the building blocks to be really solid early on, so that the things that we didn't implement, that it was very possible to implement those things in user space. And you can kind of see this by the way Compose is architected. Is, for instance, all of the material design system is implemented completely in userland. And so implementing all these things, it may not have like this, beautiful one-liner for you to use and kind of be off to the races. But our hope is that the underlying foundation is strong enough that you can build pretty much anything that you dream up.
Cool. So I just noticed people started doing that, which is great. So people are doing pluses as a reaction to the question. So I can kind of prioritize the ones that have more people wanting me to ask, because I'm hoping that there'll be more questions than time. So I'm going to start using that system. So right now, the highest scored one is from Matt. He asked, what kinds of changes / features will Compose bring to help accessibility?
Yeah, this is a good question. So the accessibility system in Compose is called Semantics, or Semantics is a subsystem in Compose, and one of its purposes is to aid accessibility tools. And the design of this is actually modeled after Flutter's Semantics. But this is designed to be a very extensible sort of system where you're able to add more and more metadata to your UI at multiple layers. And so if there's kind of semantic information that for some reason for your application you need to add to a given node in Compose, and the implementation doesn't do it, the semantic system is built in a way that you are able to add that metadata to it. And these tools are kind of being worked on right now in terms of interoping with the existing accessibility tools to make sure all of that works. That's probably the most I can say on this point. I don't have a ton of like inside knowledge on the semantic system other than the high level points.
Cool. All right. And next question. So Juan asks, what parts of Compose would you most like people to play around with and give feedback on? Either because you think they are really great already, or because you want to refine it to better fit developer needs.
Wow, this is a really good question.
So which one is your favorite child, Leland?
I wish I had thought about the answer to this more beforehand. Gosh, what I really want people to do when they play with Compose is start like one of the kind of themes that I want people to think about is like everyone's a library developer now. And so even if you're not like building some standalone module and shipping it to Maven or something, Compose really puts you in the mindset of, okay, how do I create this this reusable piece of something that does this one task? And what I would really like people to do is to start seeing the little tools that Compose surfaces to you that enables this, and to start applying them just like left and right and seeing what really, really works well. I see a lot of questions like in Slack and stuff like every day where people are like, oh, well, how do I do this thing? And how do I do that thing? And there's this kind of, I think, mentality of if there's not a one-line answer here, then it's an API that should be added to Compose. And instead, I want people to have the mentality of like, oh, I can just write a 3-line function, and now I have that API. And hey, if this works really well, maybe I should start, popularizing that idea or something. And I mean, Compose really ends up, it pushes you in a different programming paradigm where there are some things that, if you don't have that building block, it can initially seem like very complicated. It's like, oh my gosh, why do I have to do all this work to do this one thing? But the nice thing about Compose is that almost always when you have that complicated thing, it makes it very easy to move it into its own standalone place and then reuse it very, very easily. And so I want to encourage people to kind of start thinking in that way, and like showing us what the really useful abstractions are that you build, so that we can start thinking about that longer term, into when there is a really good idea, maybe we should add it to the to the Compose module, so that everyone can take advantage of it immediately.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I keep thinking a lot of the times when I want something abstracted like that, and then I'm like, a custom view is so heavy. I have to have his 4 constructors and then implement all these things and have his own class and whatnot. It does sound like that Compose would at least take that mental block away from me. That is, no, it's just a function. It's like a helper function. You can just make one and then call it. So
right.
that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, like in Compose, the hello world example is to implement a custom view that says hello world. I mean, at least that's sort of the analog that you're doing here.
That is true.
And so really this like idea that building a custom view is an advanced thing just goes away entirely. It's actually all that you do in Compose is you just build custom views on top of one another.
Yeah. All right. So let's see. I'm going to have, that's one that has a thumbs up. So Ben asked, there was a lot of discussion yesterday about unidirectional data flow. It seems very important to Compose, but fragile and easy to break. Will there be any guardrails to help enforce proper data flow?
It's a good question. I'm not sure exactly what is meant by the fragility here, but I will say that for this particular thing, this is probably something that would end up, if there were any guardrails, would sort of end up in like the linting space and not as like a hard error. One of the things that we try to do with Compose is sort of embrace the language and avoid sort of putting in rules in Compose that wouldn't make sense as like a rule of the language. And so when it comes to like specific opinions about architecture, we don't want to place those restrictions too strongly so that we actually prevent innovation in the space. And so we want to kind of let people do what they want to do, and some best practices will evolve over time, and a linting tool is like a perfect place to start trying to enforce those types of things.
Yeah, so that you can hold their hand, but if they're like, I know what I'm doing, there's a reason why I'm doing it, you're not like failing to compile. So yeah. Cool. All right.
But if there's a more specific like piece of fragility that you're thinking of that you feel like my answer did not satisfy, then let me know, and I'll try and give a better answer.
Yeah, this is why it's so great to have just that Slack to keep track of everything, because well, there's a lot of topics going on here. So I'm gonna scroll back and see what the older questions are. Oh no, but that's one that has 3 thumbs up. So I'm not trying to. It's not sorted. So all right. So Matthew asked, if Compose is meant to mostly replace Vue.xml files, what kind of support is there for handling orientation and other configuration changes? I didn't see much. I haven't seen much discussion on this in other sessions.
Yeah, this is a good question, and one we get a lot. So my sort of vision for configuration changes is really, so right now there's an ambient that is surfaced in Compose for the configuration object. But I would actually like for us or again, someone in the community to kind of develop this abstraction. But I would like for us to really turn that into basically a set of state values. And so, for instance, orientation could be just a state of orientation that you end up using that in your composable functions if you need it. So if you need to know, oh, is the orientation portrait? If so, do this. Otherwise, do this. Then doing that would just read exactly as I just said it. But if the orientation ever changed, all that would happen would be a recomposition, and it would just be like any other state change that happens in your UI. And so where long-term, where I really want us to go is to where configuration changes don't restart the activity for any of them. In the meantime,
that's a big vision, but yes, I'm with you.
Yeah. In the meantime, people will have apps that like migrating to Compose, they won't be able to make that jump, and so that's completely understandable. And so we need to make sure that we have good answers in that case as well. So I will say, like, if you're starting a Compose app from scratch, or if you're migrating and you can make this change, then I suggest you do it with Compose. But if you can't, then the basic idea is kind of the same as current state of the world, which is where you can use the configuration in your composable function. But if you need to, you need to basically have state in your hierarchy that survives configuration changes. And we have a saved instance state method in Compose that allows you to do that in a convenient way.
Interesting. Well, it's kind of, now we are getting into that land of like old stuff, new stuff, because that's kind of like the first few questions. So I kind of want to address those. I mean, it's like a block of 3 questions. I think I'll just read them all out loud and then you can give one answer. So Nicola asked, how easy do you anticipate it being for people to integrate Compose widgets into the existing app rather than having to start from scratch? And then Matt asked, are there any good example projects that show legacy UI along Compose? For example, is @generate view going to come back? I don't even know what that is. And then J Mac asked, is there a plan in the future to include compatibility in Jetpack Compose? That's kind of all about how do I migrate, how do I have old stuff and new stuff alongside each other, and is there any example that people can observe and see how things are done?
Yeah, so I'll try and remember all those questions.
Yeah.
So
how about one at a time? How do you expect
people
to? Yeah, how do you expect people to move from the existing Vue world to Compose?
So basically, I think Sean and Tiem's talk yesterday did a decent job showing sort of the start of this, but Compose is made so that you can start a composition, as we call it, sort of anywhere in the hierarchy. So usually, like our example apps and stuff, we'll do that at the root, like at the root of an activity. But you can do it for a view group as well. And so you can have your app that's maybe instantiated with a layout XML or something, and then maybe there's like some whole in that layout that you go and then you set content into that with a composable function. And then at that point, you're sort of just passing data into those functions like you would and any other parameters, and the normal tools that Compose would let you react to changes and things are there. The other direction is when you have a composable hierarchy, and then there's some point in that hierarchy that you need to then go back into the view world. And so we have a couple of integration tools for that. So there's a composable called Android View, where you can there are a couple different variants, but you can instantiate a layout and put that in your hierarchy, or you can create and manage a view during composition and have it react.
I mean, it's much like what we do right now. If we want to instantiate from Kotlin a view, right, you can either inflate it and hook it onto, whichever review group you have a handle on, or you can do it automatically similarly.
It's similar, but you have to make sure to do it in the right way, because if you just create a view in the middle of a composable function, like, you need to make sure that you use the Android View API to do it, because composition.
You wouldn't know to read, yeah.
Well, we may recompose, but we also may do that instantiation on a non-UI thread, and so then that would cause problems, and so there's all sorts of things. But if you use those APIs, that's exactly what they're intended for, and so we definitely recommend that, and we're polishing those APIs up as time goes on. Cool.
And the second one was about example projects. Is there somewhere people can read and learn?
This is a great question. I'm not sure. If not, I may bring that up. I think it would be good for us to have a sort of like brownfield DevRel sample or something like that.
It froze. Okay, you're back.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure how much you heard, but I was just saying I think that's a good idea. And if we don't already, I think we should have some sort of at least a piece of a DevRel sample that demonstrates this. Yeah.
Cool. All right. And then the next question was, is there a plan to include compatibility? Which I'm not quite sure what that means. Yeah.
Well, I guess if you mean like compatibility with the classic view system, then I think maybe my previous answer sort of suffices here. It's we have composable functions that are built to allow you to instantiate views and things like this inside of a composable hierarchy, and then you can go the other direction as well. Someone asked specifically about the generate view annotation.
Yes.
And so I'll talk about that for a minute. So we still definitely want to do a generate view annotation. The specific behavior that we want out of this annotation has proven to be more difficult for us to do than we initially thought. And so that may take still a little bit more time. A lot of it has to do with basically generating classes that are then surfaced to the IDE without like a full rebuild and stuff like that. In the meantime, without this generate view annotation, it still should be very possible to use composable functions from a layout XML or from Java with a little bit of glue code in between. And we should have a sample at some point that shows that. But essentially, it just means that you'll have to create a view class that subclasses a specific class that we provide you. And then from there, that view class can then have an API that's like equivalent to your composable function. And that's what the generate view annotation will generate at some point. But for the time being, writing it yourself shouldn't be that difficult. It's just going to be boilerplate like anything else.
Yeah. So having a sample will probably help a lot already.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So next we have a 4 thumbs up question, which is, are you surprised by Swift UI declarative/reactive, and how much does it influence Compose?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am surprised. Or like when they announced Swift UI, I was shocked, but very excited about it. I think it's great. And really it helped validate a lot of what we were doing as sort of the future. And there's a lot of Swift UI that's different than Compose, but a lot of it also goes in very similar directions. And I think it speaks to just how much of a revolution these declarative component-based toolkits are. And I think in a few years we'll have new grads entering the workforce that won't know any other way. They'll say, well, what do you mean? How would I do that in this like imperative way that feels weird to me? And that's really exciting. We're all sort of coming around this general kind of blueprint of an idea and innovating on it in different ways. And so the innovations that Swift UI has are different than Compose's innovations. And there's definitely a lot to learn there. Some of them are fundamentally different and incompatible, and so like they're different choices. And then the other things are things that we can learn from and sort of build off each other in a way. And so yeah, in general, I'm very excited about Swift UI, and I think having these big companies innovate in this space and spending so much resources and investing in really trying to do this programming model correctly, I think that's really exciting.
Cool. And then there's a question about from Matt that asks, what's your favorite part of Compose that hasn't gotten lots of attention?
Let's see. So something that I think a lot of people miss is the animate API. We have a composable function called animate, and basically it takes in any value and returns a value of the same type, but that value that it returns is now animated. And that's sort of like a weird thing to wrap your head around when you first see it. You're like, what does this mean exactly? But this is sort of part of this bigger picture where what composable functions really allow you to do is abstract over time. And so a composable function, because it has this ability to recompose, what you can do is you can build these abstractions that, as far as the type system is concerned, nothing has changed. But what you've done is you've transformed this value that you're now using, and it's constant in this like snapshot in time, right? But the declaration that you've made is, well, now this value is animated, and I want to animate that over time. And this is like, I think whenever people first get this, they're just like it's amazing.
I'm waiting for mine to be blown, but right now it's just like, what?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's.
So anyway, I think people don't fully understand the ramifications of some of these APIs yet, and I think that's one of them.
Yeah, that sounds. I'm very intrigued. Of course, I mean, coming from a person who just did Colab yesterday, it may be a while until I get there. Yeah. But so something that's kind of on a related. I think related, because it's about recomposition. So Dave asked, what are some best practices around minimizing recomposition? For context, I was receiving a list corresponding to display rows from my presentation layer, and in order to recompose only the stateful elements of the changed rows, it seemed like I had to map that into the values of a list of states and then pass those states down the tree to avoid recomposing the stateless component in the mutated rows. So in general, how do you be more efficient and avoid recomposition?
Yeah, I might have to read the question again later to understand the specific case, but in general, this is a good question to just talk about, and it's something that I think about on a daily basis, because it's sort of my job and the job of my colleagues to make sure that you don't have to think too much about this, that the compiler is smart enough to kind of be good enough in most cases that you don't have to worry.
Oh, yeah.
But so one of the things I'll say is that this is an area that we're still working on. One of the things that there's basically a body of work that will allow us to safely improve some of the inferencing that the compiler does to determine if a value is changed or not. And so that'll definitely, well, I should say that will hopefully put us in a better position than we are right now. But one thing I'll say is, like, I think as developers migrating to Compose or trying Compose out, you should definitely be thinking in the mindset of immutable data structures are good. So like we have mutable state, which allows you to have a single point of mutation, and everything under that piece of mutable state should be immutable. And so you should think of that mutable state as a holder of immutable data. And when you have that piece of data, you end up sort of using your composable functions to transform that into UI. And passing that data down as you go down the tree. I mean, one thing to think about is to I would say like embrace primitives to an extent. Like I think primitive data types end up working very well for something like string and int and boolean and stuff like that. That's not to say to like avoid objects, but I think when you write reusable composable functions that don't take on sort of a dependency on a specific data type or something, and instead say, okay, here are these these primitive fields that I'm going to fill out. That ends up making it really easy. I think that's a good practice just overall, but that also ends up pushing you into a happy path with the compiler.
For his specific case, maybe you can reply on Slack, because it gets into quite a lot of detail. And we have 3 minutes left, so if you are willing to answer the questions up in Slack a little bit today afterwards, and I'll just let people keep typing. But sure. We may have only time for 1 or 2 questions, so people vote. Tell me which one I should be asking. So right now, I think the highest I can see is from Robert. Are there any good sample applications using semantics? So in relation to layout suffixes and things like that, how do you, what's the best way to adopt to different devices, essentially? Maybe you can read the Slack question yourself. It's from Robert Henley.
So I'm not sure I understand the entire question. The second part of the question I can answer. So one, the actual Compose UI toolkit itself is probably the best place to look at semantics usage, because what we're attempting to do is to have the sort of base toolkit, or for instance, like the material design components, those should sort of have the semantics necessary for like a reasonably accessible app kind of out of the box. Like if you use them, you should be okay. At least that's the goal.
And you can just jump from your code into Compose code, right? You don't have to go somewhere else to explore. Yeah,
very easy to command.
It's not the system code, essentially, because it's a library that get included.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So I would check out just the code in AOSP for material and the other things that use semantics. I'm not sure how heavy the semantics usage is in the DevRel samples like Jet News. It may be just that it works well enough as is. I'm not sure, but we should make sure that if it doesn't work, then that those semantics are added, obviously.
Right. All right. So this is probably the last question. So we have 1 minute left. So Ash asks, can you talk about tooling? Do you expect designers in bold to write code?
Yeah, I mean, I always think people tend to try and put people in one camp or the other. You're either a designer or a developer. And I think the truth is that right now we're entering into a world where those lines are way more blurred than they used to be. And so, I mean, I know some people that think of themselves as designer first and developer second, that are incredible developers. And so, I guess basically the answer to that question is absolutely yes. Do I expect every designer to write Compose? Probably not. And I think that we will develop tools that would make Compose more approachable to anyone, designers included. But yeah, I think that's the goal, is to make it more approachable, not specifically for designers, at least like my personal goal.
Cool. All right. So that's all we have time for the live part, but there are lots of questions, and I think it'd be nice to just see what else you have to add. But any parting words of wisdom you want to tell people?
Putting me on the spot. Yeah, no, I don't have any words of wisdom, but I will hang out for the rest of the day and answer some questions in Slack just as the day goes on. And obviously, if anytime beyond that, feel free to reach out to me either, on Twitter or I believe other people have mentioned it as well, but the Kotlin laying Slack is a great place to ask people about Compose. There's a nice little Compose community being started there. So.
Yeah. Okay, John, you're not very subtle. You're telling me I'm running over time. All right. So thank you so much. That was a great way to end, because I do want this conversation to continue, and we will find you on either the Kotlin Slack or on Twitter then. Thank you so much, Leland. It has been so great to
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Everyone talk to you. Yeah. All right then. Take care. Sure. And we'll see you on Slack.
All right.
All right. Okay, John, you can take over.
Sorry. That was me and our video team adding the next talk. So it wasn't trying to be subtle, just technical difficulties.
We do have a little bit of time for a break, though.